Am I the a-hole for suing my sibling over an inheritance they tried to keep secret? Hi, Reddit. I, 34F, am in a situation I never thought I'd be in, and my family is completely divided over it. I need to know if I'm truly the bad guy here. For context, my older brother, Daniel, 38M, and I were raised by a single mom, Linda, after our dad passed when I was 7. Mom worked hard, but we were always struggling. Because of that, she was incredibly frugal, and as kids, we rarely got anything that wasn't an absolute necessity. Daniel and I had a decent relationship growing up, but he was always the golden child. He was good at school, got into a great college, and mom did everything she could to support him. I, on the other hand, wasn't encouraged to go to college and was expected to stay home and take care of her. I eventually put myself through community college and built a career, but I was always the one expected to help mom in her later years. Mom passed away last year. It was sudden and heartbreaking, but what happened after made things so much worse. Daniel, being the eldest and the responsible one, took over handling her estate. Since mom had never been open about her finances, I assumed she didn't have much beyond her small house. Daniel told me there was no will and, after debts, very little left. He said it was best to just sell the house and split whatever remained. It wasn't much, but I agreed. Fast forward 6 months. I was at a family gathering when my aunt casually mentioned how generous it was of mom to leave us both an inheritance. I was confused and asked what she meant. That's when the truth came out. Apparently, mom had a sizable life insurance policy, one that she had told several relatives about. Daniel had known this all along and never told me. Instead, he cashed it out, kept every penny, and planned to act like it never existed. He had no intention of splitting it with me, despite our mother always saying she wanted everything divided evenly. When I confronted him, he played dumb at first, then said, "Well, mom wanted me to have it." I demanded proof, and he had nothing. No will, no document, nothing. Just his word. He finally admitted that he had been the beneficiary and had quietly taken the money because he deserved it. For being the one who went to college and made something of himself, I was livid. This wasn't just a few $1,000s. It was a life-changing amount. I had spent years taking care of mom, sacrificing my time, and he just decided I didn't deserve anything. I told him if he didn't split the money fairly, I'd take him to court. He laughed and said I wouldn't have a case because technically, he was the listed beneficiary. That's when I got a lawyer. I didn't want to sue my own brother, but I had no choice. The lawyer told me that while Daniel was the beneficiary, there was precedent for contesting situations like this, especially since there was evidence that mom verbally intended for us to share everything. Several family members backed me up, saying she always told them we'd split her estate 50-50. Once the lawsuit was filed, Daniel lost it. He accused me of being greedy, of ruining the family, of being jealous that he had made something of himself. His wife even messaged me, saying I was trying to steal from their kids. But I don't see it that way. This was never just his money. It was our mother's, and it should have been shared. After the lawsuit was filed, Daniel tried to get ahead of it by reaching out to family members and painting me as the bad guy. He told everyone that I was trying to punish him for being successful and that I was obsessed with money. He also started implying that mom had favored him because I was always difficult and resentful growing up, which is complete nonsense. Meanwhile, I started gathering more evidence with my lawyer. The strongest support came from my aunt and 2 cousins, who had all heard mom say, multiple times, that she wanted everything split evenly between me and Daniel. One of my cousins even had a text from mom a few years ago where she mentioned, "When I'm gone, you and your brother will have what I leave behind." It wasn't legally binding, but it helped show intent. Then, things took a turn I wasn't expecting. I found out Daniel had actually lied about the will. One of our distant relatives, an older cousin who had been helping mom with paperwork years ago, reached out to me privately and asked, "Are you sure there was no will?" I told her that Daniel had insisted there wasn't one. She hesitated and then said, "That's strange. Your mom had me witness something years ago, and I'm pretty sure it was her will." I was stunned. If Mom had written a will, where was it? And why did Daniel insist one didn't exist? I went back to my lawyer, and we started digging deeper. We sent a formal request for any legal documents in Mom's name, and sure enough, we found out that she had written a will about 5 years before she passed. And just as I suspected, it clearly stated that everything was to be split equally between me and Daniel. So what happened to it? Turns out, Daniel had found it first and destroyed it. This discovery changed everything. The fact that he had actively hidden and destroyed the will was not only unethical, it was fraud. I confronted him with this, and for the first time, he looked genuinely nervous. At first, he denied it, but when I mentioned we were filing for legal action based on the missing will, he crumbled. He admitted that he had found the will shortly after Mom passed and had thrown it away because it wasn't fair to split things equally when he had been the one who did everything right in life. I was absolutely furious. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the betrayal, the deception, and the entitlement. He thought he could rewrite history and decide that I didn't deserve what our mother wanted for me. Legally, this put him in serious trouble. Destroying a will is a crime, and now my lawyer had grounds to escalate the case. At this point, Daniel started panicking. He begged me to just drop it and offered to give me some of the money, but not all of it. He still wanted to negotiate, as if this was something he had any right to control. That's when the rest of the family started turning on him. The same relatives who had told me to keep the peace were suddenly horrified by what he had done. My aunt, who had been one of Mom's closest confidants, completely cut him off. Even some of the older relatives who had initially sided with him admitted that he had gone too far. After sitting with everything for a few days, I realized there was no easy answer, and my fiancé and I talked about it at length, weighing the pros and cons. If I took the settlement, I would get a fair share of the inheritance and avoid dragging this out any longer. But if I pushed forward, I could hold Daniel accountable for what he did, something he absolutely deserved. My lawyer warned me that taking him to court could be drawn out and emotionally exhausting. Even though I had a strong case, I also couldn't ignore how this was affecting my family. Some relatives wanted nothing to do with either of us until it was over. My aunt remained firmly on my side, but others were pleading with me to just let it go for the sake of keeping the family together. It was frustrating. Why was I the one who had to keep the peace when Daniel was the one who lied, stole, and destroyed evidence? Then something happened that made my decision clear. Daniel showed up at my house unannounced. I hadn't seen him in person since the confrontation about the will, and he looked terrible, disheveled, stressed, and honestly, desperate. He begged me to drop the case. He said it was ruining his reputation, that his in-laws were furious, that his wife was threatening to leave because she was humiliated. I listened to him rant for a few minutes before I asked, if I had never found out, would you have ever told me about the money? He went silent. He couldn't even lie. That was all the answer I needed. I told him I wasn't dropping anything. If he wanted to settle, he had to return every single cent that should have been mine. No negotiations, no compromises. He tried to argue, but I stood firm. He had already proven that he couldn't be trusted, so why should I let him keep even a fraction of what he stole? A week later, my lawyer finalized the settlement. Daniel caved, agreeing to return my share of the inheritance in full. But the damage was done. In the weeks following the settlement, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I had won. I got what was rightfully mine, and Daniel had been forced to face the consequences of his actions. But at the same time, it didn't feel like a victory. Family gatherings became more awkward. Some relatives refused to acknowledge what had happened and acted like everything was normal, while others avoided me altogether. My aunt and cousins who had supported me stood by my side, But there was an undeniable divide in the family now. Daniel, on the other hand, made himself scarce. He and his wife moved to another city, supposedly for a fresh start, but I knew it was because they wanted to get away from the judgment of the family. He never reached out, not to apologize, not to explain, nothing. As far as he was concerned, I had ruined his life. A few months later, I heard through a mutual friend that Daniel was struggling financially. Apparently, without the extra inheritance money, he and his wife had to downsize, and he was bitter about it. I won't lie, a part of me felt vindicated. He had tried to cheat me out of my rightful share, and now he was facing the consequences of his own greed. But another part of me just felt sad. This was my brother, the person I had shared childhood memories with, the person who was supposed to have my back. And now we were strangers. As time went on, the weight of everything slowly started to lift. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I stopped caring about the relatives who judged me without knowing the full story. And most importantly, I stopped feeling guilty for standing up for myself. The inheritance allowed me to make some meaningful changes in my life. My fiancée and I put a down payment on a home, something we had been saving for years to do. I also used part of the money to pay off some debts and set up a small fund for the future. It wasn't about the money itself, it was about what was fair. And knowing that I could move forward without resentment eating away at me was worth more than anything Daniel had tried to take. A few months later, I ran into one of Daniel's old friends at a coffee shop. We weren't particularly close, but we had known each other growing up. He recognized me and hesitated before saying, "Hey, I heard about everything with your brother." "That's rough." I just nodded, not wanting to get into it. But then he said something that caught me off guard. He was complaining about it the other day, saying you ruined his life. But honestly, he kind of did it to himself. He always thought he was smarter than everyone else. I didn't say anything, but hearing that from someone outside the family was strangely validating. Daniel had been so convinced that he could manipulate the situation to his advantage, but in the end, his own actions had cost him more than just money. A year passed without a single word from him. No calls, no texts, nothing. And I was okay with that. But then, out of the blue, I got a message from an unknown number. It was Daniel. I stared at the screen for a long time before opening it. The message was short and vague. "Hey, I know it's been a while. Can we talk?" No apology. No acknowledgement of what happened. Just a request to talk. I sat there, debating whether I should respond. Part of me was curious. What did he want? Did he regret anything? Or was he just trying to manipulate the situation again? But another part of me wondered if I even cared anymore. I had already moved on. My life was better without the stress, without the constant weight of family politics. Did I really want to reopen that door? So I put my phone down and walked away, leaving the message unanswered. The months passed, and I continued to focus on what mattered. My fiancée, our new home, and building a life that felt stable and joyful. I'd learned to compartmentalize the pain from my family, especially from Daniel. The tension that had once felt suffocating slowly faded, replaced by the quiet strength of knowing that I had made the right decision. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel reached out again. This time, in a different way. It was a letter. It showed up in the mail one afternoon, and at first, I thought it was just another attempt at manipulation. I debated throwing it out unopened, but something in me hesitated. I decided to read it. The letter was surprisingly honest, much more than I had expected. Daniel admitted that he had been wrong. He acknowledged destroying the will and the hurt he caused me. He wrote about the guilt that had haunted him since everything went down, how it had torn apart his marriage, and how he had no one to blame but himself. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to justify his actions. He simply said that he had learned some hard lessons, and that he realized he had been selfish and reckless in ways that had hurt both of us. Reading those words was like a punch to the gut. It was the first time in so long that I'd heard him take responsibility for his actions. And I'll admit, a part of me wanted to respond, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had finally understood the damage he had done. But another part of me knew that it wasn't that simple. Forgiveness is complicated. And after everything, I couldn't just snap my fingers and heal the wound he had left. Trust, once broken, is not so easily repaired that I thought about it for days. My fiancé, as supportive as ever, told me that it was up to me whether I wanted to respond. But he reminded me that I didn't owe Daniel anything. Not after what he did. In the end, I decided to write back. I didn't want to leave things unresolved, but I wasn't ready to reopen the door to a relationship with him. So I wrote a letter of my own. I told Daniel that I appreciated his honesty, but that I couldn't forget what he had done. I wrote that I had moved on, and that I didn't have space in my life for the kind of relationship he was hoping for. I told him that I was glad he was owning up to his mistakes, but that it was too late for us to go back to how things were. I also said that I hoped he would continue to reflect on his actions, and that maybe someday, if he truly changed, we could have a different kind of relationship. As time went by, I found myself settling more into the life I had built. My fiancé and I were doing well. We worked together on creating a future that was strong and secure, free from the toxic dynamics of my family. I was finally in a place where I could breathe without the weight of past betrayals hanging over me. The inheritance had been a catalyst for change, but what it ultimately gave me was clarity. The clarity to understand that I didn't need to constantly fix things, especially when it came to someone who wasn't willing to meet me halfway. My relationship with my extended family also began to heal, but in a new way. Some members who had sided with Daniel came around eventually, acknowledging that he had crossed a line. Slowly but surely, they stopped treating me like the villain in a drama I didn't write. But there were still those who believed I had overreacted, or who couldn't understand why I hadn't just let it go for the sake of family. I stopped trying to explain myself to them. Those who truly cared about me understood the gravity of what had happened, and the rest? I wasn't going to force them to accept my version of the truth. As for Daniel, I hadn't heard from him in over a year. Life moved on, and so did I. I stopped holding on to the hope of a reconciliation. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. If I was honest, there were moments when I felt sadness, not because I missed him, but because I couldn't ever look at him the way I used to. That part of me, the sibling who had shared memories with him, the person who had trusted him, was gone, and it hurt to realize that. But then something unexpected happened. One evening, while having dinner with my fiancé, I received a phone call. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. It was Daniel. The conversation was brief, and surprisingly, he wasn't calling to ask for forgiveness or beg for my trust again. Instead, he simply said, "I'm doing better now. I've been working on myself, and I just wanted to let you know." That was it. There were no apologies, no grand gestures, just a statement of where he was in life now. It was almost like a final chapter in a book I had long since closed. He told me he was working on his marriage, trying to rebuild his relationships with other people in his life. He thanked me for not getting involved when things fell apart for him. I didn't know what to say at first. There was no real closure in the way I had imagined it. No perfect moment where we could hash out the past and move forward. But in that moment, something shifted for me. I didn't need him to fix everything. I didn't need him to apologize in the way I had been waiting for all this time. I simply needed to hear that he was taking responsibility for his own life and actions. That was enough. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a while, reflecting on everything. It wasn't the perfect resolution I had wanted, but it was a resolution. Daniel had found a way to start his own journey, separate from mine. And I had already walked mine, one that was better for me in the long run. I didn't respond to his call immediately, but I didn't feel the need to either. There was no more anger, no more resentment. just acceptance that our paths had diverged, and that was okay. So, life continued. The wounds, while deep, had healed, and the lessons were clear. Sometimes, people make mistakes that leave scars. And while you can't always control the outcome or how others choose to move forward, you can always decide how you want to live with it. I chose peace, and with that, I knew I had finally let go. So, after everything I've been through, I'm left wondering, did I overreact? Was I too harsh on my brother? I know I stood up for myself, but I can't shake the feeling that maybe I should have been more forgiving or given him a second chance. But at the same time, his actions were so damaging that I don't know if I ever could go back to how things were. Was I wrong to sue him over the inheritance? Should I have just let it go for the sake of family? Or did I do what was right? I'd really like to hear some opinions on this. Am I the a-hole for not giving him another shot? Or did I make the right choice in drawing a line? If you've ever dealt with family drama or had to make a tough decision that could change everything, this story might hit home. Let us know what you think. Did they do the right thing by standing up for themselves? Or should they have let it go for the sake of family? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.